Hi, this is Felipe Osario. So this is a very interesting video because I promised I wouldn't get into politics. Now, though I'm not going to go deep into the exact politics that I adhere to, there is going to be political overtones to this video, but simply said, this needs to be talked about. Now, if you notice in this world lately, there has been all kinds of radicalization. If you notice what happened in Paris, I believe something very extreme seems to be happening within the people's inner feelings and sensation and what is happening with the hierarchy, the people making decisions, so to speak. Are all these wars that are happening or have happened, is this something that people decided or chose? I think the obvious answer is not. This is something that, as our President Eisenhower once warned us about, it was something that was more governed by the military-industrial complex as well as Central Intelligence Agency. Now, a lot of people believe that this overarching conspiracy about a new world order or some kind of nefarious order to take down the world, they think it's kind of ludicrous. It's a little bit conspiracy theory. I think those people are naive. Now, if you just consider for a second how technology progresses in a world, technology seems to increase almost exponentially, right? And people have kind of a lot of power just with an iPhone, for example, let's say a hacker. Now, just as technology grows, so does your ability to defend. So once we were able to defend against knives, then we were able to defend against swords by creating shields. Of course, you get to machine guns, well, then you have to create tanks, really strong things, big things, to protect against even the smallest of weapons. But as weapons increase and augment, what ends up happening is this curve kind of starts deviating from itself, whereas the weapons are increasing at almost an exponential rate at a certain point, and then suddenly you have the inability to defend against things like nuclear weapons. The point is that as technology grows, so does our ability to have power. So does the ability for the individual to have power. And this is a very important point because this is not something that should just be glossed over or ignored. This has huge geopolitical implications. What does it mean that individual now has so much power? Does this mean that the world is suddenly that much more susceptible to destruction, for example? I think this is the overarching philosophy that elites or people in power kind of understand. They understand that the masses should not be armed when the armament is so strong. Defense systems just don't seem to be commensurate. The point I'm trying to make is that it's not a conspiracy theory that we're talking about. It's a logical deduction of what needs to be done to a world that is acclimating in technology, that is essentially proliferated with new technologies growing at ever exponential rates. So what would you do in this scenario? Now, it should be noted that when this country was created, our founding fathers created with the intention of trying to get away from the international banking cartel, something that had essentially governed the monarchies of Europe and had created horrible scenarios such as armies being traded or borrowed to kings and queens. And for the citizens, of course, with the whole feudal system, it was close to an enslavement type scenario for a large majority of people. And let's also mention that Game of Thrones, with the idea of the Iron Bank, was creating a great analogy of the European banking powers of the monarchies. So our founding fathers was trying to get away from this. This was a small segment in history where there was a revolution, but not just a revolution, but one where the actual end conquest, meaning what was able to be produced from the revolution, was something that actually was positive in the end. It was something that there was more enlightenment that was brought into the world based on the knowledge that our founding fathers had. And one of their basic principles, one thing that was repeated by Thomas Jefferson, by Benjamin Franklin, was this idea that if you trade safety for liberty, well, I think as Benjamin Franklin says, you deserve neither safety nor liberty. So the point that I'm trying to make is liberty is a very touchy thing. Liberty is something that thousands of lives have fought over, that people have essentially kamikaze themselves for the sake of liberty, for the sake of being able to have freedom of speech. Now we see these tech monopolies justifying the ability to restrict freedom of speech. And how did they do this? Well, they start banning people, such as Alex Jones. And this is where it gets really scary. Basically a point where technologically we would start restricting people just based on their tendencies. And then you look at these search engine algorithms and you see how predictive they have become. You have to wonder, how much of this has been used against the civilians? How much of this technology has been militarized and at some point introduced through either the CIA or through some other intelligence services to essentially help control the people? Because isn't that what the game is all about? Isn't the Game of Thrones about the control of the empire? So that's why I call these people who don't believe in New World Order naive. Because I'm not even talking about checkers. We're talking about a game of chess. We're talking about the entire world. We're talking about a new era that is unprecedented in human history, where technology has grown to such a rate that every individual has more power than they've ever have, given a certain amount of money. And I think that's where this all actually comes down to. A lot of people are complaining about Antifa. They're complaining about global politics. They're complaining about race identity politics. Now, there's a bigger thing to this huge picture. The reason why journalists are writing pieces that seem to be not just incorrect often, but sometimes they're backing up their own errors, as was happening with the Covington kid case, where some papers weren't even retracting their own stories that was obviously false. These journalists are only finding ways to write this because, let's be honest, they're getting paid for this. So, who has the money? For one, you should know that most of the media elites have been against the Logan Act, meeting with each other in all kinds of different meetings, such as the Bilderberg group, if you haven't heard. Oh yeah, but it was Alex Jones, the guy who got kicked out first, who was talking about the Bilderberg. How interesting. And something else that Alex Jones said, I believe he talked about that the elites, in this process of wanting to control people in a game of chess, not checkers, that they would essentially kind of piece the world in different pieces. He talked about a North American union. He talked about a European union, an African union. And sure enough, he talked about the idea of destabilizing the Middle East, since the Middle East was the hardest to conquer. And look what happened. Look at all the wars that we've been getting in the Middle East. Look what's happening to the European Union. And not to mention there are individuals who have come from this Bilderberg group who have admitted that the creation of the European Union was thought about in one of these meetings. What I'm trying to say here is that secret meetings are common. The secret meetings are happening. These media elites, they all know each other. The stories that you're seeing are being dictated by few individuals and then are being funneled through money to all these reporters that we take for granted as some form of authority. And this is where our world has become. Real news versus fake news. So what is real news? Because what we tried to report on actually came true. But we were fake news to a lot of different interpretations because I guess we didn't have the credentials. To meet the credentials of news, of reporting, this is more based on whether you got things more right than wrong. Are your sources validated? Are you an authority that has credibility, not just authority? You see what I'm saying? So making up news stories and then having a lot of money and then paying YouTube to essentially get your stories ahead like CNN does, despite reporting on the Hillary Clinton scandals as if she did nothing, and not to mention not just the Hillary Clinton scandals, but also the whole DNC. I mean, one of their correspondents was literally giving answers to Hillary Clinton. And CNN is what now applauded, they're celebrated by YouTube by being put ahead of other people despite all of that. There's something horribly wrong happening in our world. And I'm afraid that Philip K. Dick was right with Minority Report. And if you didn't know, Philip K. Dick wasn't just writing what he thought might have happened. According to his own words, he actually believes that he was channeling a form of pseudo-reality, or some kind of reality that was at very least very approximate to the one that we might be living in right now. How much do these people know? What do they know? What is consciousness? What is spirituality? How are we all connected? And are we being controlled in a way that we're not identifying because we're so consumed with our product? We're so concerned with our social media status that at times we lie. We deceive others just for the approval, for the sake of that ding, ding, ding kind of ring, like, oh, I just won a poker game kind of thing. Or I just won a jackpot, It's really hard to see what's happening to the people right now. And the only way that I can think of it is that we're in this mass hysteria, almost like this apocalyptic zombie state type, just ignorance, not understanding what is around us. And then we have these people essentially march around what I would consider to be this global corporate elite attack that is happening. These people march on their footsteps with shit like racial identity. Like, are you serious? Like, do I care if you identify yourself as a specific type of Latino or a specific type of, whatever race it is that you are? I'm mixed, man. My great grandmother was an African slave in Brazil. I don't care what race I am. What matters to me is the idea that we don't get into this tribal mentality. See, I'm afraid that whatever is happening with this Antifa or this indoctrination towards radicalization against free speech, but also this indoctrination of let's identify ourselves by our races. Does anybody know that in social psychology, this creates violence? That this incites a type of brain that gets us away from the higher order thinking, and it makes us think in more tribal terms? And I'm wondering if part of this behavior that is essentially being kind of allowed by social media companies, if this somehow is being incentivized by somebody a little bit higher, that somebody knows something about social psychology. And why would I say that? Because I used to work at a social psychology lab at UC Santa Barbara. I used to be part of the experiments, not just working as a confederate for the experiments, but I used to go in the boardroom with all the psychologists in campuses and talk about the latest theories about social psychology. I'm aware of the theories behind social psychology, and everything that I see that is happening in our world, to me, seems like a big goddamn chess game. And sadly to say, these social psychology things like racial identity profiling, it only incites further aggression, further tribal mentality. And this is why I'm kind of stepping away from politics and the insanity of all this nonsense. I see people like Tim Pool, who also seem to be very concerned about what is happening with our current status. And I know that my channel has been mostly shifted towards doing paranormal topics, things that are kind of off in a fringe. And there was a reason why I chose to do that. Not only because I do believe that a lot of that is real, and I'm talking about the exopolitics, it's also the fact that I didn't want to get into this insanity race that was happening, that I was seeing, and kind of be in a trench warfare with this massive manipulation that I thought was happening. I think there's a good reason why Alex Jones was the first to go out. I think some of the things that he talked about, the European Union being taken over, you see what's happening with France. And that's some deep shit, man. And let me tell you, this whole thing of what's happening with Macron, what really concerns me is that I doubt that this guy really cares for the people. In a way, I don't think this guy is at all connected to the people. I think he has higher sources, probably related with the European Union, that he values over his own country. And I'm willing to guess that he values the status of his life over the status of his citizens. So to me, this is one of the categories that I use as evil. I know that Friedrich Nietzsche said there's no such thing as good or evil, but categorically, when you detach yourself from mass population of people and are mostly concerned about an authority figure and yourself perhaps, I think that's a form of evilness. So I think what France is doing is a form of fight that needs to happen. But I guess the point of the video is that they really want to have an effect. You need to cut the snake at the head, and that's really the money. That's what the Iron Bank in Game of Thrones was about. That's what our founding fathers was running away from when they came to America. You know, it's this international banking system. People need to find a way to decentralize. Simply said, you know, I'm victim of not having done this myself. Kind of motivating myself in the kind of this impromptu, whatever you want to call this speech. I don't care. But given what's happening with YouTube, I am kind of forced to put this idea out there and just let people know that, look, shit's getting hairy, man. Philip K. Dick might have been right about how things are going. So it wouldn't be the first time if you haven't heard about his other book, Flow My Tears, The Policeman Said, and some of the characters that ended up coming in real life, in his actual real life. This is an actual anecdotal story. Take it as you will if you believe it or not. Just saying, right now, the race is on, guys. This whole artificial intelligence that Elon Musk is so afraid of, this has just started. I mean, everything that we're seeing is consumer grade. We're not even looking at the military aspect of this technology. And let's be honest, it's not the nuclear weapon that's going to win the next world war. It's going to be the best artificial general intelligence, if that is ever created in the next decade or so. So I guess I'll just leave it off at that. Just wanted to put out some of my concerns. And yeah, thanks for joining me. This is Felipe Osorio, signing out.